our time slot as well. So why don't I go ahead and call the meeting to order? Um, I'll start by reading the Ethics Act statement. It is the duty of subcommittee members to avoid conflicts of interest and appearances of conflicts of interest in performing the duties as a member of the Diversity and Inclusion Subcommittee of the Issues Committee and the State Bar. Any member of the subcommittee who is aware of any personal conflicts or appearances thereof with respect to the matters before this subcommittee should disclose those at the meeting. Does anyone wish to disclose a conflict or appearance of conflict? Or hear none? I want to take just a moment to welcome everybody for agreeing to serve on this important subcommittee. Um, as we all know, diversity and inclusion is a important issue in the profession and in some respects in the country generally. And so I'm very, very pleased that Madam President and asked me to serve as chair. But I want to make sure that we understand that this is a committee that I fully expect to be very, very robust and to bring your fine ideas and to not be potted plants, because I know none of you are, and therefore we have some very serious issues to address. I know Madam President and the ED have talked about some things they would like to get accomplished, and I'll give them a moment to chat about those as well. But I think everyone knows everybody on the committee, but I know Leonore had asked me to make sure that we introduced some folks who might be working with her, as I recall, Leonore, so I want to do that. But I don't feel a need in the interest of time for all of us to introduce ourselves unless someone thinks that's accretive to the process. All right, Leonore, why don't you take the floor for a minute and introduce who you want to introduce to us today?
Yeah, hi everybody. Good afternoon. I just wanted to make sure that all members of the subcommittee know Mary Lee. She's my paralegal and she will be communicating with you as I will. And if you can't reach me immediately and you need information relative to the subcommittee, please feel free to reach out to Mary Lee. Thank you.
Mary Lee, welcome. We look forward to having you aboard and working with us.
Thank you.
Terrific. Leonore and I talked about how to approach this, and quite frankly, I would like to be writing on a clean slate, but we don't quite have a clean slate because some of these issues have been addressed by our officers. So we will be guided in part by those. But I sort of view this as an organizational and a directional meeting for us to decide amongst the materials that we have, how precisely we want to proceed and how we can proceed, and to keep in mind that unlike, for example, my firm, and unlike, for example, the bar associations, we have some parameters because we are a regulatory body, as you all know. And I think we attended what was called the mandatory orientation, where we had a wonderful presentation on Keller and what Keller requires us to do and not to do, or permits us to do and not to do. And so we will be mindful of those considerations as we proceed. But I do want us to give some serious thought to where we want to go, how we want to get there, what resources we need to assist us, and with the overall goal of keeping in mind that our task is to study and review these issues and ultimately to make some recommendations, if we so choose, to the Issues Committee for its use and consideration. And so keep that in mind in terms of what our task is. Leonore, I know you wanted to make a couple of remarks before we get started. So why don't you give us a few remarks and then we'll get started with the materials.
I don't have very many remarks other than to say that when you're thinking through the direction that you'd like the work of this subcommittee to go, please keep in mind that in terms of gathering information, one of the great things about the subcommittee is you can generate questions and then I can be helpful to you in finding out information that might answer those questions, particularly as pertains to what other regulators are doing, are considering doing, and have done in this area. I'm looking forward to working with you all, and as several have said, it's really important issues, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to assist you in this.
Thanks. Madam President, I wanted to give you an opportunity to give us your thoughts and views on the important work of this subcommittee, and let us know anything you would like for us to consider as we go forward.
I really don't want to spend much of the committee time talking, just to say thank you all for agreeing to be on this. It was prompted in part by a memorandum that LAP sent us. They have their finger on the pulse, I think, of the lawyers of the state, and really sort of nationally. So they're often out there out front bringing our attention to matters. So, but I didn't want us to feel like we are bound just to that memo. It just raised some issues that are worthy of discussion. And I think we've got the right people to do that. So thank you all.
And Alice, the same with you. Do you have any words of wisdom you want to share with us before we get started? Because I know you have some ideas as well.
Well, Todd, thank you. Let me show you my face. There we go. Thank you for asking me, Todd. You know, I think what you've said already is, you know, the concern I have is that we make sure that we're within our authority to act. But with that, I think there's a fair amount that can be done. One of the things that I have done is included some extra funds in the proposed budget for 2021 that might be available to your committee if you see the need for some special training for counselors or committee members. So that is available, and I'm here to help facilitate resources that might help you with the committee's work.
Thank you, Alice. We have shared with you some of the materials that, quite frankly, have been mentioned and that sort of prompted a lot of this. In particular, that was the LAP board memo to the officers, and then the reply, and then some of the information in the report from the NCBA as well that may or may not be part of our charge here. But I just want to say I sort of feel like I've come full circle here in a timely fashion. I actually started with the bar in 2010 or 11 when Bonnie Wire came down to Charlotte. I think it was maybe my swearing in as president, and really talked about how she wanted to focus on diversity and inclusion at the state bar level, and how she was looking to diversify the bar membership, and how she was looking to have folks join and get involved to help us broaden our D&I at the state bar level. And I have to tell you that when I attended my very first meeting as an advisory member, I saw what she meant, and I'm happy to say that we have made some progress in that regard. But as I like to say at my firm, D&I is a journey. It's not a sprint, and so we have a lot more work to do. And I'm very pleased that we've been asked to do that, and I know we've got the right folks to get that done. And so what I wanted to do was sort of start with the materials that we shared, hoping that that will prompt some conversation and discussion about how we believe we ought to organize and how we ought to focus, given our very strict charge here as to how we proceed. And Leonore and I talked about this, and we thought about offering topics for the group's consideration, and then we decided against that because we didn't want to be the ones directing how the conversation flowed. And so I like Alice, believe that we have some good talking points based on the memo that we've gotten and the bar's response, but I didn't want that to be something that restricted us. And so I wanted to throw this out because I know we've got some folks who feel very strongly in this area about anybody who want to offer a few words that they have in their mind about how we want to proceed, or direction, or anything that they want to say for the good of the order as we continue to dive into our charge here.
Todd, I think I'd like to say a couple words if I could.
Perfect.
So first of all, I just, want to say thank you to Barbara and to Alice and to all of the leadership at the State Bar for creating this subcommittee. We being LAP sent the memo to the officers to address some concerns that we had, and I did not expect that we were going to get the quick turnaround that we did. So I am very thankful that the memo we sent, I think I want to say it was June or so of last year.
June. Right.
Yeah, was received and responded to so quickly, and that it led to tangible action in the formation of this committee. And so I am grateful about that, and I just I look forward to putting our heads together and seeing tackling some issues, and I really hope that we can have real open and honest conversation, and that this can be like a really safe place among friends and colleagues where we can talk about some issues without fear of hurt feelings or things being taken the wrong way. Because I think that a open and honest discussion is really the best path for us to really make progress in addressing some of the issues that need to be addressed.
Thank you, Chad. Others? All right. Why don't we start with a couple of the suggestions that the leadership of the
John
bar.
had his hand up.
I can't see. Peter on?
Todd? You
Yeah, I
mind
didn't
if I
see
make a
anybody.
few?
I'm sorry. Okay.
You
Go
mind,
ahead,
you
yeah.
mind if I make a few remarks? Okay.
I would welcome it.
Okay. And I hope I don't go on too long, but this is something that I've thought about for a pretty long time. And I think one of the things, I'm glad you mentioned at the beginning, Todd, that we're a regulatory group and we're different from the other affinity bar groups, which does put some limitations on what we can do. But I think that what's most important is that this committee has to start with an understanding of what the state bar does. And I know that Peter and Brian have prepared a 1-hour CLE presentation, and I was able to give it once or twice. And I know that even counselors who have seen the presentation learn about things that the bar does. And so when you start, the word systemic is used a lot. And the interesting feature of the state bar is that when you look at systemic for the state bar, it's really the work of the state bar is performed by and the groups that operate under its control. And I think that what happens there is that sometimes, and I know that I personally felt frustrated because of the inability that the state bar has to really influence diversity and inclusion. For example, simply with membership on the state bar council. The districts are so different in size and makeup that there are a number of small districts that have no minority representation within the districts themselves. And I think that's something we have to take into consideration. Also, when you look at, the Appointments Advisory Committee is supposedly charged with the responsibility to make appointments to committees. But I imagine others who have served on that committee felt the same way I did, in that a lot of the appointments are actually already predetermined by the committees themselves. And Ted, you said we should be open and honest, so I'm going to be open and honest. One of the so-called offenders would be LAP. So LAP oftentimes tells us who they want to be on LAP. So the Appointments Advisory Committee does not have the discretion to take certain factors into consideration in making those appointments. The same thing applies to some of the other groups like Client Security Fund, I think CLE. They'll make recommendations as who they want to have appointed. So I think in some respects, when you're talking for the council and training for the officers, you're almost speaking to the choir. And where we really need a lot of that training done is with the committees and with the groups that are under the auspices of the state bar, because I really think that's where most of the improvements can be made. As far as district representation goes, we can talk about how we would like to influence the members of the district so that they would take minority representation in consideration. But I think that's also something we're going to have to dig deeper into, how the districts are comprised before we come up with a policy. So I think what I'm saying is I think we really need to have a real good understanding of the state bar and its committees before we come up with policies for diversity and inclusion.
So John, are you suggesting by that comment that perhaps the presentation that you reference should be part of our educational process? You mentioned a presentation by Peter and Brian that sort of says what the bar does. Are you suggesting that perhaps that's something that might be useful for this committee to observe?
Absolutely, and I think it would be useful for the groups that operate under the auspices of the state bar umbrella to see as well, because I don't think that, it may be more important for some groups than others. For example, DHC is a good example, and Catherine might get a little bit mad at me on this, but I think it's important for lawyers who are to be disciplined to see lawyers that look like them on the DHC. And I think what happens is that folks who have counselors who have been on.
I noticed, there we go. Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead, John. You froze a minute. Go ahead.
Okay, that's part of the culture that I think we have to look at. That I think we have to make a much more conscious effort to populate those portions of the state bar that we do have an influence over more than those portions of the state bar like the council that we don't have as much influence over.
Agreed.
John, I would never get mad at you. And I agree with you. I think we do need more diversity on the DHC. I'm definitely a believer in that.
Yeah, no, I know. It's difficult when you have I'll use myself as an example. If a past president says, I want to be on the DHC, it's difficult for the Appointments Advisory Committee to appoint a Black woman with 15 years of legal experience who past president of the state bar. It's just hard to do, but it's what we have to do.
We did it an hour ago.
Good.
Yeah, and I was supposed to be on that committee as well, and I apologize, I had a court hearing. But John, to your point, I'll be honest with you, you're spot on, but I have been encouraged, at least as of late, that the Appointments Advisory Committee has been very intentional with respect to considering diversity of all sorts, racial, gender, geography, et cetera, in making its appointments. And so I take your point. It is very well taken, but I believe that the Appointments Advisory Committee, as I understand it, at least certainly has the discretion to consider, but diplomatically reject a recommendation from a committee if they deem that there's a better person suited to hold that position. Is that your understanding, Madam President? Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
I would love to stand corrected.
Todd,
I would like to,
I've got a couple of hands up.
before
Go
we
ahead.
transition away, though, I wanted to let the group know that Peter has a video that basically shows what the presentation he and Brian created covers. And so I believe it's something he can put a link to in the chat, and certainly something I can follow up with the subcommittee with after the fact by email.
Yeah.
And just, you know, and it may cover probably, I think, and Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, what we do. I think this subcommittee is being tasked with what we can do. And so taking a look at the regulations that govern and all that may be helpful and may be good additions to what's covered in that video.
I've got a note to make sure we do that as well. I can't see my, I hadn't got it up here yet, but Peter, I think you said there are 2 hands raised.
Yes, it looks like Catherine Fry and then Colin.
and Dorothy.
Okay, all right, so okay, in what order, Peter? Catherine, Colin, and Dorothy?
Yes.
All right, Catherine, why don't you go, and then Colin, and then Dorothy?
Sure, Your Honor, I spent way too much time on Zoom court today. Todd, to go back to something that John said, I think I was on appointments for 1 year. And one of the things, I think there was a pretty decent discussion about that piece. But one of the items that was missing is a robust group of candidates. And so one of the things I had done was I reached out after the last appointments and contacted the Capital City Lawyers Association and the Wake Women Attorneys. And I said, here are the spots that are coming up. Here's what you do. And so I think one of the things, just to sort of tie off what John had to say, the Appointments Committee, I think, is an exceptional place to address some of our efforts, but it's also a little more ground oriented that we have to let people know. And I think it's very important to personally reach out and talk to people. I was not able to attend the Capital City Lawyers meeting to make a personal plea, but I believe that I'll be able to do that in the next 2 months and just sort of indicate, here are the roles that are available and here's what they do. And so I don't know exactly what Barbara was referencing earlier, but if it's what I think it was, I think that's interesting because I know that one of the people who put their name in the hat came from the Capital City Lawyers Association. And I'm glad that, we were able to just get additional candidates, but I kind of wanted to put that pin on what John had to say, that we just need to figure out a way to get more candidates as well.
I agree. And I've had this discussion with Catherine, at least on one occasion, that we ought to be more intentional in terms of reaching out to the affinity bars at all levels of the state to try to get folks on the gender and the diversity front to serve and get interested in the bar and affirmatively and actively champion them for leadership roles in the bar, not to just become involved, but to become leaders in the bar as well. All right, Colin, and then Dorothy and Peter, you help me on the hands raised because I got to figure out how to get my view here. But Colin, go ahead.
Thanks, Todd. I mean, some of the comments have been, the last couple of folks have been along the lines of things I was thinking. I really think the Appointments Advisory Committee has done a really good job of being sensitive to the things. But the problem is, as Catherine has said, is we need a better feeder system. It needs to be more deliberate and more intentional in finding folks, because I think the dozen or so people on the committee have reached out and tried to do that. But we have 25,000 resident lawyers in North Carolina. We had 25 people on the list roughly who had volunteered to work. I mean, we need a bigger pool of folks, and we need our counselors helping us with people in their districts who are interested and would have the time and the inclination to serve in these various roles, and as well as some of the affinity bars. But I think our counselors are geographically spread across the state and would be in a great place to help give us ideas about, from their experiences, of who on a local level are the kinds of folks that we want to make meaningful contributions.
Absolutely.
Dorothy, then Marcy.
Dorothy, and then Marcy.
So
Dorothy?
I am with you all 100% of the comments that have been made thus far, and kind of speaking to what Colin and Catherine was speaking about as far as getting the information out and the push for that. It's kind of ironic that you are mentioning this right now, because I had just, we just had a communications meeting on yesterday. And one of the things that I have talked about with Brian and Peter and the committee is that I would like for us to do a better push for getting information out to the local bar districts, local bars and the districts and the different affinity bars, just information in general, but especially like what you have talked about as far as letting the different districts know about what the different appointments are. I also kind of want to speak a little bit about what John was talking about. I have shared with some people that one of the biggest reasons why I came or sought my particular position to come on to the State Bar Council was because when I thought of the State Bar, I heard of things about the State Bar. It was always, and putting it quite frankly, that white man's organization, or that organization full of white men. And so I wanted to become a part of it so that I could be one that would be intentional with educating others like me, and hopefully encouraging them to come on to the different positions or become state bar counselors or advisory members or whatever. And it was a blessing for me to be able to get on the appointments committee, and I didn't even ask to be put on it, and I was put on. And so I think that, since I've been on there, and I'm sure that there was a push before I got on there too, but I know since I've been on there, I have done just what I sought to do, which is be intentional with, having some diversity on these different boards and commissions and different things, because that is just a personal goal that I had for myself. And we, and I know a lot of people don't like to talk about it, don't want to hear about it. And I've said this before, but a lot of minority members, minority lawyers, minorities in general, see the state bar as an entity, as one that is against them, or that is challenging in all those different diversity, just different diversity areas, or challenged, I should say, in those different areas. So I would like for us to do a better job with trying to dispel that, and showing people that it's not that way. And it's not that, the Black lawyers are the ones that are automatically just being chosen for a trust account, for checks of their trust accounts and different things like that, because there are lots of people who really truly believe that they're being discriminated against, or that, just because. And I would like, that I'm glad to see that we have this committee so that we can help dispel some of those things. With that being said, I know that this may not be the appropriate time, but I want to go ahead and throw it out there, Todd, if I can, that I think we should really strongly consider, if possible, looking at the state bar having its own diversity and inclusion statement, that aside from the bar council, I know we have a whole committee that's working on whether or not we should include some of that language in those materials, but the state bar itself having that kind of statement, and then a diversity plan, so that folks will see that, that the state bar is really intentional with it. Because based on the memo and then the response by Alice, the memo from LAP and then the response by Alice, it looks like they were looking to implement some things or make some suggestions about what the state bar itself does,
right,
aside from the bar council and just us completely in general. So I would, suggest that. I did look at some other states examples that are all, the regulatory bars from other states, and they do have them.
right.
Been operating with them. I think that's a way for folks to see that the state bar is taking this seriously, and we actually have a plan, and we actually are doing these things. And a lot of those things, like the racial equity training and all of those, the education pieces, and how we would go about hiring, you know, the folks at the state bar and different things like that could be included in that plan. And folks could be, you know, it could be some accountability there.
Thank you, Dorothy. And I agree with that. And I think I hope that our recommendation will focus on the intentionality of how we must approach this issue at various levels within the state bar, within the confines. Marcy, I know you have your hand up, and I'll recognize you now.
Hi, Todd. I just want to let
Hi.
you know I'm one of the products of Bonnie Wire's vision.
Good.
She's the one that approached me and originally and said I needed to run for state bar council. So that's how I even started, became involved. Dorothy, I want you to know that also small town, small firm lawyers feel like state bar picks on them too. So, you know, we've tried really hard, I know, since I've been on the state bar, and especially with the communications committee and others, to try to improve that those feelings about the state bar and to put faces of on the state bar and to let, you know, the counselors to help with that as well, to dispel that. As far as how to create diversity on the council, that does have to be done at the local level. But also, there's a lot of ways to try to diversify the council. And one of those is practice areas. And I will just tell you, I'm not sure how this would work with any of the other issues of diversity, but I know that when I speak at family lawyer seminars, or if I'm in any of my family law group meetings, whether it's the AAML or any others, I am constantly encouraging family lawyers to run for state bar council, because obviously we all know it's important also to have diversity of practice areas on the council. So I don't know if there's forums out there where can encourage people, lawyers, and it's hard sometimes because we all know how much time it takes to be a state bar counselor, and not a lot of lawyers can afford to do that financially. But if you could, you know, just take the opportunity at your various organizations to make that a topic, to talk about it and talk about why it's important, that might help with the diversity issue in terms of the council. And I love this discussion, by the way. I think it's very helpful.
Thank you. Peter, is there another hand up? I don't see one. No, I don't see one.
I can't see any.
Okay. One of the things I want to confirm, and it was.
This is Camille, and
Okay,
I'm
Camille.
a guest, and I wonder if I could say something.
Absolutely.
So this is Camille Stell, and I'm currently serving as a committee member on the Publications Committee. The reason I called into your meeting today is because of something that happened at the Publications Committee meeting earlier this week that I continue to feel bad about, and I think it ties in with your conversation today. So you had a new council member that Dorothy, I think, introduced and recommended that she get involved and run for council, Daria Hayes from Central Law School.
Just a quick, Daria is an advisory member to the Communications Committee. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for correcting me. So Daria, but I think Daria is involved because of Dorothy's recommendation, perhaps. So Daria got on the call, and it was a small group of us, and I didn't say anything. I sat there quietly because I didn't know Daria and I didn't introduce myself. And I thought, well, introductions will happen soon. And then just because of the way the meeting was set up, we ended up not really doing introductions except for Daria, who introduced herself, but none of the rest of us did. And then Mark Enriquez, one of our other new committee members. And it felt a little odd that I sat there in silence for such a long time when there were about 4 of us on a screen. And I regret, with Daria being the only, you know, person of color, that I didn't try to strike up a conversation. And then it could be happenstance, but she dropped off of our call about the time we started talking about an article for publication about the KKK. And I hope desperately that she didn't hear that we were publishing that article and didn't have a lot of context around it, and that's why I hope that she didn't leave the call because of that. But that would have been a great point for somebody on the committee, myself included, to say, let's put a little context around this conversation, and we didn't. And so my point is, it is hard to be an outsider in these events. You have so much time as counselors together where you get to know one another and socialize with one another and be a part of the club. And then most people are very kind to visitors like me who show up randomly, but it's hard. And I think recognizing someone's first time at a meeting, you know, that was probably hard. And so I think that there are things that you as a committee need to be doing, you know, full stop, to make this better for all 30,000 lawyers in North Carolina. But I think that also just thinking about ways to welcome one individual new person who's showing up for a call, particularly in the days of Zoom when it's, you know, hard anyway. But, you know, if we were sitting in a room, I can also imagine the new person walking in, because I've done it a million times, and you don't even know where to sit. Like, there's spots at the table, but do I sit at the wall? Am I really a member? So just thinking about, for those of you who've been on this committee or on this organization for 10 and 12 years, it took you a while to get to that spot, and maybe making it a little easier for those who are new. And I promise you, I don't mean this as a lecture or how unhappy I am, because I'm not. I'm only frustrated at myself because I wish I had been more welcoming of Daria earlier in our call before she got gone earlier in the week. So thank you for listening to me, and I'm gonna mute and go back to listening.
Can I respond just quickly, Todd, to something?
Yeah, I know you chaired that committee.
Well, actually, she was talking about Daria got on for the publications committee meeting. I think that was on Monday afternoon.
Oh, publication. Okay.
Did that mistakenly. And so her abruptly getting off was because she realized at a point that she was in the wrong meeting, and that she really is on the communications one, which was yesterday. And so, Camille, I just wanted you to know at least that part, that she didn't, from what I understand from having spoken with her, she was just kind of like, oh my God, I'm on the wrong meeting. You know what I mean? I think I got on the wrong one. It wasn't because of, you know, having seen that there was a publication of this particular article or anything like that. So I just at least wanted to.
Okay, that makes me feel better. I sent her an email.
She actually did feel quite welcomed, because she said that when she got on, there was an acknowledgement like, hey, we have Daria Hayes. So right. She really did feel welcome, and I at least wanted to let you know that, so you wouldn't.
Well, thank you, because I felt guilty about that, and I sent her an email and said, good, you know, it was good to see you at the committee, and I think it's good to show up at things when you are learning about it. So thank you so much, because I'll sleep a little bit better tonight, Dorothy.
Yes, ma'am.
I see no further hands. I do want to return to one issue that is indeed going to be a focus of this committee, I hope. And that is that it is absolutely true that a lot of the lawyers, certainly in the minority community and small town lawyers, do believe that the state bar is not their friend. And I certainly had that issue brought home to me very clearly several times, and most recently in the grievance committee, one of the new members who had joined, a minority member, had that same reaction, that her understanding was that the minority lawyers always felt like the state bar's out to get them. And I take Marcy's point about small town lawyers having the same view, but the reason I mention that is because, and I go back again to being intentional, because of that comment that was made in open session. I and Bobby Bowers took it upon ourselves to call and set up a call with this committee member and talk through those very issues to make sure we understood and tried to understand the root of those sorts of views and feelings. And I think to Dorothy's point, you know, once we talked through the issues and once she started to see how the state bar actually works, I think she was disabused of the notion that perhaps the state bar is out to get minority lawyers, or that the state bar is out to get small town lawyers, and better understands that it's an educational process that we must go through. And I see, hopefully, the establishment of a diversity and inclusion committee at the state bar level as being able to address those sorts of issues that are critical. And they can work with the publications committee, they can work with the communications committee, they can work with the counselors to make sure that they make presentations, outreach, et cetera, et cetera. But it's all about being intentional. And I think it's going to start with our consideration of whether it's advisable and whether we make a recommendation that we actually establish a D&I committee at the state bar level where it sits. We can talk about that, how it is populated. We can talk about that, what the membership looks like. We can talk about that, what its mission is, goals are. We can talk about that because that's something that we all talk about. But I think getting to that point and getting that operational will allow us to start chipping away at some of these issues. Again, it's not going to happen overnight, but we've got to make that a part of our fabric, if you will, at least in my view, at the state bar level, in order for us to start addressing these issues, on a consistent, uniform, accretive type basis. Because I think that's the way to drive at this issue over the long haul, and that too demonstrates to third parties and to other stakeholders that the state bar perhaps is getting more serious about D&I because it has now put this committee in place to address these very issues. And we will need a budget for that committee. We'll need to populate it and all those things, but that's something we can address on down the road. But I think that is going to be one of the critical considerations that we must consider in terms of our recommendations. And again, I want us to keep in mind that at the end of this process, we're going to be making recommendations about what we recommend that the state bar do, and then the state bar and the issues committee will decide what to do it, and then we will go to work influencing the implementation of our recommendations. Quite frankly,
Todd,
yes, Leila,
I just wanted to make sure the subcommittee was aware and everybody. I know there's sort of just a general sharing. But in the listening to the general sharing, I am taking notes, and I expect that when Todd and I get together again, there are many things that will be added to the list that Todd and I had already created based on what you're sharing. So I wanted folks to know that they may share, but there's some good things that were not on that list that we had that will be additions.
And further, once this meeting is over, and unfortunately, I see we got like 15 minutes left. One of the things I always say to folks is, if you think of something that you wish you had said during the course of the meeting, you think about it afterwards, make sure that you reach out to us and let us know so we can get that on the list. I see a note here that somebody sent me a note that John is raising his hand again. Is that right, John? Thought I got a message that John was raising his hand. John, are you there? Are you frozen again? Okay, go ahead. You're freezing up on us.
Can you hear me now?
I can now, yes.
Okay. One point that I want to make is I think, especially in light of the perception of the state bar, which I think is absolutely true. I think what Dorothy said, what you said, what Marcy said is absolutely true. Untapped potential is the Distinguished Service Award. I think that in the past, that was not really created for us to self-congratulate members of the state bar. I get a little, I'll be honest with you, frustrated when counselors and past presidents and prominent jurists are presented with an award. Not that they're not deserving, they are. But I think the real purpose behind this award is to recognize those unsung heroes in the bar who make contributions to the legal profession. And I think if we can recognize members of the minorities, rural areas, because when the officers go out and make their 4, what we call dog and pony show presentations each year, the members of the local bar that come to those are very appreciative and say, gosh, I learned so much about the state bar and I really appreciate you coming. And I think rather than again, congratulate ourselves. If we could use these distinguished service awards to recognize contributions that these other folks are making in the minority community and the rural communities, I think it would go a long way toward improving the image of the state bar.
Agreed. Totally agree. Let me see. I don't see any further hands up. One of the things I want to try to accomplish before we get off the call, I know we got a lot of work to do, is to see if we can at least get some idea as to what folks think about some of the recommendations that have already been listed for us to study as we go forward in connection with recommendations that we may make. And that's simply, I don't know if you all have your materials in front of you, but what I'll do, I am a technological dinosaur, but I'm going to try to share my screen here and try to talk quickly about the bullet points in the State Bar's August 31, 2020 letter. See if we can get at least some consensus. We're not voting and making recommendations, but get people's views generally on that issue. I think I can do this right now. Are you seeing my screen? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, I wanted to look here at these bullet points where the officers have asked us to consider these particular bullets for study, and to not obviously that's not exhaustive in any way, but what I'd like to do is just to get some ideas to what folks believe in terms of whether we ought to pursue these 6 bullets since they're laid out there as potential areas of study. So just respect to the first bullet, is a sort of a general view that this is an area that this is an item that we ought to study, if nothing else.
Yes,
And
I would say that I like all of those. I think all of recommendations.
All right. Okay, good. How about bullet number 2? I know Dorothy has voted in favor of all. We just sort of, so I'm trying just to get a consensus as to whether folks believe these are areas that we should study. Bullet number 2, any folks believe that it's not something we should consider? And Peter, see if folks, let me know if folks are raising their hand. Number 3, commit to the diversity and inclusion 360-degree scan. I'll be honest with you, I know what those scans are, but I didn't particularly know what this one was. It was sort of referenced in the lap board's memo. So it is a, if you look in the lap board's memo to the officers, they reference this particular scan, and I'll just read to you just for background what sorts of things that assessment might cover, because I have the laptop, I have the web page up on another screen here, and I'll just run through them quickly so that everybody know what we're talking about when we talk about that scan, at least according to this website, reference in the lap board's memo. Workplace inclusion, and I'm just rattling off the bullets here. 3 P's review, and that is practices, procedures, and processes. Workforce representation, talent landscape, company DNA mapping, exit analysis, supplier diversity, community relations, marketplace opportunities, educational review, campus climate assessment for higher education institutions. That's not us. But those are some of the sorts of things that I believe they will, or organizations like that would do in this sort of 360 analysis. And I didn't know exactly what was encompassed. And so I have a better idea now, but I want to make sure that folks have some sense of what we're talking about and whether or not that gives them heartburn, recognizing again that all of this is subject to our Keller parameters.
Yeah, Todd, I don't know, just a little bit to embellish on that one. My thought, at least, about the 360 scan was essentially that we would kind of following up on what we were talking about a little earlier about the perception of the state bar by people of color and women, that we would, you know, survey, for lack of a better term, but get input from members of the bar about how they felt the bar was doing on these issues. That's kind of what I was thinking as it related to a 360 scan, as far as asking for feedback among the people that are directly affected by these issues as to, what they feel like, how do they perceive the state bar, and what are some, just ask the question, what can the bar do better? Those kind of things.
So would you envision those types of questions being asked not only of our membership, but perhaps of members of the public?
I mean, I was thinking of asking the questions of lawyers, of what they think of the state bar as relates to diversity and inclusion issues.
All right, we can get into the granular aspect of it as we learn about what we might or might not do. But I take your point, so thank you, Ted.
I think Todd is just talking about some kind of self-evaluation. That's a sort of a formal one there that's, probably has some cost to it, and anything where you have some but anyway, I think the point is some kind of self-evaluation.
Yeah, and the thing that jumps out to me as well is, so far we've talked about sort of an external evaluation. I'm always interested in an internal evaluation as well, as to how
be both. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it would be both. And I'll take this opportunity to mention one thing that we probably don't have time for it today, but you saw the on the agenda, one of the bullets here is the third item here, the NCABA's report regarding the NCABA's history. I believe that this committee, may be asked to make some recommendations about whether we ought to recommend that the state bar engage in a similar analysis as to the state bar's history in this area. I don't know if Alice is on. Alice, are you still on? Or Barbara? I know there's some notion that we might want to consider whether we make a similar recommendation to the Issues Committee, that we perform a similar analysis along the lines of what's set forth in that NC Bar Association report. I believe we have time to get into it today. Go ahead.
Oh, I would like to speak to that a little bit.
Please. Okay, great.
After I read the NCBA report and talked with Jason Hensley, who actually did a lot of that research himself, and I talked with Tom Linsford about kind of his institutional knowledge. And, I think the formation of the state bar and what was the genesis for that, and how the state bar has reacted to some major events over our history, and particularly Brown versus Board and some other things, I think that would be worthwhile for us to have a better understanding of that. I would suggest that this might be something where we would employ somebody who is a historian, or possibly a law school person that has some perspective on it, as opposed to it being a staff endeavor.
Agreed.
I think there's a lot to be learned from where we came from.
Agreed. Okay, great. All right. And obviously, I mean, to your point, I think if the recommendation would come from us, perhaps, and if it's accepted, then the devil would be in the details about how we go about doing that. Is that sort of what you're saying, Alice?
Yes, I am. That remains to be worked out, but
yes,
I think there's value in having that understanding, which I'm not sure we have previously really put it all in one place the same way the Bar Association has.
Agreed. The other bullet points on here, I believe based on what our discussion has been today, the consensus would be that we would take a look at these other bullet points as well. Does anyone disagree with that? If so, speak up, please. Again, none of this is intended to be exhaustive, but I want to get some initial takeaways about things we know we may want to take a look at, or we believe that's sort of off the table for the moment. So thank you for that. The other things, and somebody mentioned it as well, I wanted to address in the 4 or so minutes that we have left. Think about what sort of educational resources we might need to assist us with our work. Maybe we don't need any. For example, the Keller presentation that Carmen and others did was absolutely outstanding, and I think helped a whole lot in terms of knowing what the parameters are. And I think that sort of informs our work. And so the question becomes, we perhaps need to look at how other state bars may have gone about establishing their diversity committee, and whether there's anything we can learn from how they approach it. Not to say that we duplicate it or that we do the same thing, but whether there are things that we can learn. And so one of the things I want you to think about is what educational resources, background materials might we need to do our work and to make recommendations that are meaningful and impactful and accretive to the work that the state bar does. Again, my view is this is going to be a long-term project. It will, we may do our work within the course of a year, but the recommendations, I'm hopeful, will proceed at the next level. So think about that. It's sort of along the lines of what we do on some of the other subcommittees when we have quote unquote experts in the field to come in and talk to us about how they addressed a particular issue in their jurisdiction. And I know, I think somebody mentioned it before. I too looked at a couple of websites from other bars, and one of the things one of the things that I'm keenly aware of is that the Florida Bar Association did something similar to what we're doing now, and they set up what was called a program evaluation committee back in 2010 that made a total of 12 recommendations to the state bar. Things like adopting a definition of diversity, and adopting a statement of commitment towards diversity in the legal profession, setting up grant programs to facilitate D&I efforts at some of the voluntary bar associations. Realize that we may or may not be hampered by what we do, but there are other bar associations that have done the exact same thing that we're not undertaking to do. And so think about whether it might be helpful to our work to have Leonore and others gather some of those materials for our review, or to have somebody come chat with us about how they approached their work in this area when they were starting out. Again, just food for thought as I see it. Again, as I said before, I'm viewing this as an organizational and directional meeting, and how we get our bearings and how we move forward. And we have gotten some excellent recommendations and thoughts so far. But to the extent you have other things you believe would be helpful to us, make sure you let us know. Let Leonore know, and then she will let the rest of us know. So that's what I really wanted to have us discuss today. Again, as I envisioned, we didn't have potted plants on this call, and I really appreciate the candid and honest comments. And again, these are tough discussions, and a lot of times they border on race and ethnicity and gender and all sorts of things that some folks find uncomfortable. But we're all professionals, and we all know how to diplomatically and respectfully talk to our colleagues as we tackle these tough issues. And so I'm very appreciative of the manner in which you've conducted yourself, and I know you will. And sometimes you know, there are some hurt feelings, but nobody is intending to hurt anybody's feelings. But, you know, discussions of race and diversity. And as we've seen from some of our colleagues in the bar, there's some folks who totally disagree with perhaps what we do, but we're going to press ahead with our recommendations anyway. So again, I want to thank you all for joining us. Is there anything else, being respectful again of your time and keeping us to an hour, that anybody wants to raise for the good of the order?
Dorothy has her hand up.
Dorothy, go ahead.
I just wanted to, so I won't forget, if I could throw out a name that may be possibly looked at, I think James Williams, Attorney James Williams, ex-public defender out of Orange County, maybe one that could be good to be looked at for this research, this study on the state bar. I know he did a really great presentation for the CLE board. And so on this, when we were talking about, you know, making the racial equity and diversity and inclusion CLEs mandatory. And so a lot of this kind of history that we were talking about, that Alice was talking about,
Right.
I think that he might be somebody good that we could maybe look to speak to about doing this for the state bar. And if he doesn't, himself, he might have someone that could, you know, help us out.
Okay. Well, Leonor will certainly take down his name, and you will not let us forget it. And if our recommendation is that we undertake this sort of study about the state bar's history, I would expect that we would also suggest some folks who might be ideal for consideration to do it. So thank you very much, Dorothy, for that recommendation. If there's nothing else for the good of the order, I have nothing else on my schedule and agenda here. So thank you very much for a very productive meeting. Again, thank you for agreeing to serve.